They fired me on a Wednesday and hired my ex-wife's lover on Thursday. He was sitting in my chair, using my computer, calling my clients before my parking pass was even deactivated. 3 weeks later, I hand-delivered a flash drive to the board chairwoman with one word written on it: evidence. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm about to tell you how I destroyed the lives of everyone who betrayed me using nothing but patience, documentation, and their own arrogance. I'm 42 years old. For 8 brutal years, I was the senior project director at Meridian Tech Consultancy in Boston. I built their entire client management system from scratch, working 18-hour days and sacrificing weekends with my daughter. I brought in over $18 million in revenue. I missed birthday parties, school plays, and family dinners to make that company profitable. None of it mattered when they decided I wasn't visionary enough for their new direction. The betrayal started on a Tuesday morning in March that began like any other. I was in my corner office reviewing quarterly projections when Thomas Green, our CEO, knocked on my door. He had someone with him I'd never seen before, and the way Thomas was practically bouncing on his heels told me this wasn't a routine introduction. "Jake, I want you to meet Brad Patterson," Thomas said with the enthusiasm of a man showing off a new sports car. "He's consulting with us on digital transformation initiatives." The man was maybe 35, tall and lean, with the kind of expensive Italian suit that screamed Manhattan MBA. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, his teeth unnaturally white. Everything about him was polished to perfection, from his Rolex to his manicured nails. "Pleasure to meet you, Jake," Brad said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "Thomas has told me incredible things about the work you've done here." "Thanks," I replied, trying to place why he looked familiar. "What kind of consulting are you doing exactly?" "Strategic restructuring, market penetration analysis, operational efficiency optimization, disruptive innovation frameworks," Brad said, rattling off buzzwords like he was reading from a consulting textbook. Thomas nodded enthusiastically, practically glowing. "Brad brings exactly the kind of revolutionary thinking we need. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies, spearheaded major digital transformations, completely revolutionized business processes at organizations 3 times our size." I'd heard this song before. New consultant comes in, talks about innovation and disruption, and 6 months later, half the staff is unemployed while the company bleeds money. But I kept my mouth shut and played along like the good corporate soldier I'd always been. "Sounds fascinating," I said, forcing a smile. "How long will you be working with us?" "That depends on how quickly we can implement the necessary paradigm shifts," Brad replied vaguely, his eyes already scanning my office like he was measuring it for new furniture. After they left, I tried to focus on my work, but something about Brad bothered me on a level I couldn't articulate. He looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. There was something about his mannerisms, his speech patterns, even his cologne that triggered a memory buried deep in my subconscious. I pushed the thought aside and went back to my reports. We were in the middle of our biggest quarter ever, and I had 3 major client presentations to prepare. The Henderson account alone was worth $2.5 million, and they were considering expanding their contract. The next day, I was having lunch in the company cafeteria when I saw a face that made my blood turn to ice water. Melissa, my ex-wife, was walking through the main lobby like she owned the building. She spotted me through the glass wall and waved with the kind of enthusiastic smile that made my stomach clench with dread. We'd been divorced for almost 3 years, but the wounds were still fresh. The marriage had ended in spectacular fashion after I discovered she was cheating on me with someone from her yoga studio. The divorce had been nuclear warfare disguised as legal proceedings. She'd tried to take half of everything, including the house I'd bought with my savings before we even met. Her lawyer had painted me as a cold, emotionally unavailable workaholic who'd driven her into another man's arms. In the end, I'd kept the house and most of my assets, but the legal fees had cost me nearly $60,000 in 2 years of my life. "Jake," she said, sliding into the chair across from me without being invited. "What a wonderful surprise. I was just visiting a friend who works here." "Which friend?" I asked, my appetite disappearing. "Oh, you probably don't know her. She works in the marketing department. Sarah something." Melissa looked different. Better, actually. Her hair was professionally styled in a way that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her makeup was flawless, applied by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. She was wearing clothes that screamed designer labels and expense accounts. She had that glow that women get when they're having regular sex and don't have to worry about money. "How's the freelance consulting business?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from her appearance. "Actually, I've moved on from that," she said, examining her manicured nails with the satisfaction of someone who no longer had to do her own dishes. "I'm focusing on more personal projects now." "Such as?" "Well, I'm getting married again," she announced, flashing a diamond ring that could have funded a small country's GDP. "Isn't it gorgeous?" The ring was massive, easily 4 carats, set in platinum with smaller diamonds surrounding the center stone like a constellation of wealth. "It probably cost more than I made in 6 months." "Congratulations," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral while my mind raced. "Anyone I know?" I doubted. "His name is Brad Patterson. He's in business development and consulting. Very successful, very driven, very ambitious. Everything I've been looking for in a partner." The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock, each one falling with a sound like breaking glass. Brad Patterson, the consultant who'd been touring our office. The man with the expensive suit and MBA buzzwords. My ex-wife's new fiancé. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestrated. "That's wonderful," I managed to say through teeth that felt like they might crack from the pressure. "I'm sure you'll be very happy together." "We already are," she said, practically radiating satisfaction. "Brad is everything you never were, Jake. He's ambitious, he's confident, he's not afraid to take risks or make the hard decisions. He understands that sometimes you have to be ruthless to get what you want in life." The insult was deliberate and calculated, designed to cut deep. She was telling me that I was a failure as a husband because I was too passive, too comfortable, too willing to accept the status quo. Brad was the alpha male she'd been looking for all along. "He sees the world differently than most people," she continued, twisting the knife. "He doesn't just accept things the way they are. He changes them. He takes what he wants." "I'm glad you found what you were looking for," I said, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "I am too. You know, Jake, looking back, I think our marriage failed because you were too comfortable being mediocre. Brad would never settle for that. He's a winner." As I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown timer, I felt something shift inside me. The old Jake would have accepted this humiliation, would have told himself that some things were just meant to be. The old Jake would have quietly looked for another job and tried to rebuild his life with dignity. But the old Jake was dead. He died the moment I realized that my ex-wife and her new lover had conspired to destroy my career. That afternoon, I got an email from HR requesting a meeting for the following morning. No details, just a request to meet with Sandra Walsh, our HR director, at 9 a.m. sharp. I knew what it meant. In corporate America, unexpected HR meetings only happen for 3 reasons. You're getting promoted, you're getting sued, or you're getting fired. Since I hadn't applied for any promotions and wasn't involved in any legal issues, that left option 3. I spent the evening in my home office, staring at the wall and processing what was happening. They were going to fire me and replace me with the man who was marrying my ex-wife. It was personal, vindictive, and perfectly legal. The next morning, I walked into Sandra's office at exactly 9 o'clock, wearing my best suit like armor. She was there with Thomas Green and Michael Ross, our head of operations. All 3 of them had the same expression. Apologetic but determined, like doctors preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Jake, thanks for coming in," Thomas said, gesturing to a chair that felt suspiciously like an electric chair. "Please, have a seat." I sat down and waited for the script to begin, my hands folded calmly in my lap while my heart hammered against my ribs. "We need to discuss some organizational changes that are coming down the pipeline," Sandra said in the careful tone HR people use when they're about to ruin someone's life. "The company is moving in a new strategic direction, and we need to realign our human resources to match our evolving objectives. Corporate doublespeak for 'you're fired,' but we're going to pretend it's business." "I'm being terminated," I said flatly. "We're restructuring your position," Thomas corrected, as if changing the words would change the reality. "The board has decided that we need different skill sets to take the company to the next level. More dynamic leadership, fresh perspectives, innovative thinking." "Who's replacing me?" "Brad Patterson will be taking over your responsibilities," Thomas said, and I swear I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt cross his face. He brings exactly the kind of visionary leadership we need for our digital transformation initiative. I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. You're replacing me with my ex-wife's fiancé. We weren't aware of any personal connection when we made this decision, Sandra said quickly, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Thomas, however, couldn't maintain the charade. His face flushed, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was lying. He knew. Of course he knew. What's the severance package? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. 3 months' salary plus benefits continuation, Sandra said. We think that's very generous given the circumstances. And my current projects? The Henderson account? The Morrison renewal? Brad will handle the transition. We'd like you to spend the next week bringing him up to speed on your responsibilities and client relationships. They wanted me to train my replacement, the man who was marrying my ex-wife, the man who was stealing my job, my livelihood, my professional identity. They wanted me to smile and pretend everything was fine while they systematically destroyed my life. When does this take effect? I asked. Next Friday will be your last day, Thomas said. We know this is sudden, but the board wants to move quickly on the restructuring. I understand, I said, and I did. I understood perfectly. Jake, I want you to know this isn't personal, Thomas added, the lie so obvious it was almost insulting. You've done excellent work here, but sometimes companies need to evolve, and that means making difficult decisions about personnel. Of course, I said. I'll make sure Brad has everything he needs for a smooth transition. I walked back to my office feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. 8 years of my life, 18 million in revenue, countless sacrifices and sleepless nights. None of it mattered because I wasn't connected to the right people, didn't have the right background, wasn't willing to play the right games. Over the next week, I trained Brad Patterson to do my job. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my professional life, watching this smooth-talking charlatan prepare to destroy everything I'd built. Brad was charming, confident, and completely incompetent. He asked questions that revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of our business model, our client base, and our technology infrastructure. When I tried to explain the complexities of our project management system, he would nod and say things like, right, but what's the big picture strategic value proposition here? The client retention system tracks all communications, automates billing cycles, manages contract renewals, and generates performance analytics, I explained on Wednesday morning, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Okay, but what's the ROI on something like that? He asked, leaning back in my chair like he already owned it. The ROI? Brad, this system processes $18 million in annual revenue. Without it, we'd need 15 additional administrative staff members. Right, but couldn't we just outsource that to India or somewhere? Cut costs, improve efficiency, maximize shareholder value? I stared at him. He wanted to outsource our core competency to a call center in Bangalore. The client relationships are built on personal trust and technical expertise, I said slowly, as if explaining to a child. Our clients pay premium rates because they're working directly with senior consultants, not phone operators reading scripts. Sure, but we need to think outside the box here. Sometimes you have to disrupt your own business model to stay competitive. Creative destruction, you know? He was going to destroy everything I'd built, and there was nothing I could do about it. Or so I thought. On Thursday, Brad moved his personal items into my office while I watched like a man attending his own funeral. He hung his MBA diploma on the wall where my engineering awards used to be. He placed photos of himself and Melissa on the desk where I used to keep pictures of my daughter Emma. One photo was from their engagement party. Melissa was wearing a flowing white dress, looking radiant and happy in a way I'd never seen during our marriage. Brad had his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera like they'd just won the lottery, which in a way they had. Thanks for everything, Jake, Brad said as I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box that seemed to mock the significance of my 8-year career. I know this transition isn't easy, but I really appreciate your professionalism throughout this process. No problem, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. You know, maybe we could all grab dinner sometime. Melissa speaks very highly of you. She says you're a good guy who just got stuck in old patterns of thinking. Old patterns of thinking. Like believing that competence mattered more than connections. Like thinking that hard work would be rewarded. Like trusting that people had honor. That sounds great, I lied. wondering if my face looked as dead as it felt. I carried my box of belongings to the parking garage, my footsteps echoing in the concrete cavern. 8 years of my professional life reduced to family photos, a coffee mug, and a paperweight my daughter had made in elementary school. But as I sat in my car, staring at that pathetic box, something crystallized inside me. I wasn't defeated. I was furious. And fury, properly channeled, could be a very powerful tool. That evening, I sat in my home office with a bottle of scotch and my laptop. I still had administrative access to several Meridian systems. I'd built most of their IT infrastructure myself, and the network security protocols I designed were complex enough that most people didn't understand how they worked. Corporate IT departments are notoriously sloppy about revoking access when employees leave. They'll disable your email and lock your office, but they forget about the 17 different systems you have back-end access to, especially when you're the person who built those systems in the first place. I started with the email servers. Meridian used an advanced backup and archival system I designed for compliance purposes. Every email, instant message, file transfer, and document access was logged and stored on secure servers. The system was invisible to most users, but it captured everything like a digital surveillance network. It took me 6 hours to find what I was looking for, but when I did, I felt a cold satisfaction that was better than any drug. The first email was dated 19 months ago, from Melissa's personal Gmail account to Brad's corporate email address. Can't wait to see you tonight. Jake's working late on the Morrison account again. I'll meet you at the Marriott downtown at 8, room 412. Wear the cologne I like. 19 months ago, we were still married. I was working late trying to land the Morrison account, which eventually brought in $2.3 million for the company. While I was building their future, my wife was fucking my replacement. I kept digging, my anger growing with each piece of evidence. Hotel receipts charged Brad's corporate credit card. Calendar entries for strategic planning sessions that corresponded exactly to times when Melissa had told me she was visiting her sister in Connecticut. Phone logs showing hundreds of calls between them, often lasting over an hour. But that was just the appetizer. Brad's corporate credit card statements revealed a pattern of fraudulent expenses that made my blood boil. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, charged as client development. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, listed as executive retreats. Even jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Co's categorized as client gifts. He'd been using company money to fund his affair with my wife for over a year. But the most damning evidence was in Brad's employment file. His consulting contract with Meridian had started 26 months ago, a full 7 months before he met Melissa. But according to the corporate code of conduct, consultants were required to disclose any personal relationships with employees or their family members. Failure to disclose was grounds for immediate termination and legal action. Brad had been violating his contract from the moment he started sleeping with my wife, and he'd been lying about it on his quarterly disclosure forms for over a year. I spent the entire weekend building a comprehensive timeline, fueled by rage and single malt scotch, credit card statements, email timestamps, hotel reservations, phone records, calendar entries, expense reports. I cross-referenced everything with my own work schedule to show exactly when Brad was having sex with my wife, while billing the company for fictitious business activities. By Sunday night, I had a complete dossier, 57 pages of evidence, organized chronologically, with supporting documentation and witness statements from hotel staff who remembered seeing them together. But I'd also discovered something else, something that turned my personal revenge into a federal crime. Brad had been using my login credentials to access confidential client files for weeks before I was officially terminated. He'd downloaded client contact lists, financial reports, strategic plans, and proprietary data, corporate espionage on a massive scale. The security logs showed that someone had been accessing my accounts from Brad's IP address at times when I was provably elsewhere. He'd somehow obtained my passwords and was using them to steal corporate secrets, probably to give himself an advantage in the transition. The violation was so brazen, so arrogant, that I almost admired it. Almost. Monday morning, I called Frank Martinez, Meridian's head of security. Frank and I had worked together on several cybersecurity projects over the years. He trusted my technical expertise and my judgment, which made him the perfect ally for what I was planning. Frank, I need to report a serious security breach, I said. What kind of breach? Unauthorized access to client files using stolen credentials. I have comprehensive documentation. Jesus, Jake. Send it over and I'll take a look. I'd prefer to deliver it in person. This involves criminal activity, and I want to make sure the evidence chain is preserved correctly. We met at a Starbucks near the office. I handed Frank a sealed envelope containing printed copies of everything I'd found, plus a USB drive with the digital evidence. Frank spent 30 minutes reviewing the documents. His expression grew darker with each page, and by the end, he looked like a man who'd just discovered his house was on fire. Jesus Christ, Jake, this is serious. This is federal crime serious. It gets worse. Check the access logs against the timestamps. Brad was using my credentials to download client files before I was even terminated. He had inside knowledge of the restructuring. Frank's face went pale. If this is accurate, we're looking at corporate espionage, fraud, contract violations, and possibly criminal conspiracy. What happens next? I have to escalate this to the board immediately. They'll want a full forensic investigation. The FBI might get involved? Good. Make sure they understand that this wasn't a coincidence. Brad didn't just happen to be available when my position opened up. He orchestrated my termination so he could take my job. Frank nodded grimly. Jake, I'm sorry this happened to you, but I'm glad you documented everything. Most people wouldn't have had the technical knowledge to uncover this. Most people don't build the systems that get compromised. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Linda Rake, Meridian's board chairwoman. Linda was in her mid-60s, a former federal prosecutor who'd made her fortune in corporate litigation before joining our board. She had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and completely intolerant of bullshit. Mr. Morrison, I understand you've provided some very concerning information to our security team. That's correct. I've reviewed the preliminary documentation, and frankly, I'm appalled. What you've uncovered suggests a level of corruption that goes far beyond simple personnel issues. I'm glad you understand the gravity of the situation. I'd like to schedule an emergency board meeting to address this matter. Would Thursday afternoon work for your schedule? I'll be there. Excellent. And Mr. Morrison, this conversation stays between us until the meeting. I don't want anyone else to know about this investigation. Understood. One more thing. You should know that what you've uncovered could result in serious criminal charges against multiple individuals. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'm prepared for justice to be served. Good. I'll see you Thursday at 2 o'clock. I spent the next 2 days refining my presentation with the obsessive attention to detail of a man preparing for war. I wanted to be absolutely certain that every fact was verifiable, every timeline was accurate, and every conclusion was supported by ironclad evidence. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Brad and Melissa. This was about exposing a criminal conspiracy that had cost me my career and could have damaged the company's relationships with major clients. Thursday arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what I was about to do. I dressed carefully, choosing my best charcoal suit and a conservative tie. I wanted to look professional, credible, and completely unshakable. The Meridian building was a gleaming 38-story tower in downtown Boston's financial district. The boardroom was on the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of Boston Harbor. 12 leather chairs surrounded a massive mahogany conference table that probably cost more than most people made in a year. I arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that contained the most important presentation of my life. The board members were already seated. Linda Rake at the head of the table, flanked by 11 other executives I recognized from company newsletters and annual reports. Thomas Green sat at the far end, looking like a man who'd already been told his fate. Mr. Morrison, thank you for joining us, Linda said. Please, take a seat. I sat down and placed my briefcase on the table in front of me, the sound echoing in the silent room. Before we begin, Linda continued, I want to make it clear that this is a formal investigation into allegations of serious corporate misconduct. Everything discussed here today will be recorded and may be used in criminal proceedings. Do you understand? I understand completely. Excellent. Please tell us about your concerns regarding Mr. Brad Patterson and any related parties. I opened my briefcase and began to speak. For the next 55 minutes, I laid out my case with surgical precision. I presented the evidence in chronological order, building a narrative that showed exactly how Brad and Melissa had conspired to destroy my career while committing multiple felonies in the process. I showed them the emails proving the affair had started while I was still married. I presented the credit card statements showing Brad had used company funds to pay for hotel rooms, restaurants, and gifts for his mistress. I demonstrated how he'd violated his consulting contract by failing to disclose his relationship with an employee's spouse. But the piece de resistance was the evidence of corporate espionage. I showed them the security logs proving Brad had used my credentials to access confidential client files. I presented documentation showing he'd downloaded proprietary information weeks before I was terminated. I even had email evidence suggesting he'd shared some of that information with competitors. The board listened in absolute silence. A few members took notes, but most just stared at the documents I was presenting with expressions of growing horror. Thomas Green looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair and never be seen again. By the time I finished, the room was dead quiet except for the sound of rain hitting the windows and the distant hum of traffic far below. "These are extremely serious allegations," Linda said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Do you have additional documentation to support your claims?" I slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything is on there. Email archives, financial records, security logs, phone records, witness statements, hotel receipts, credit card statements, all verified and authenticated. I've also prepared a complete timeline showing exactly when each violation occurred." Linda inserted the drive into her laptop. The board members leaned forward as she scrolled through the files, their expressions growing increasingly grim with each piece of evidence. "Mr. Green," Linda said, her voice ice-cold enough to freeze hell itself. "Were you aware of Mr. Patterson's relationship with Mr. Morrison's ex-wife when you approved his hiring?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair like a man sitting on hot coals. "There may have been some mention of a personal connection." "Some mention?" Linda's eyebrows rose. "According to these documents, you knew Mr. Patterson was conducting an affair with a current employee's spouse while using company resources to fund that relationship. I didn't know the specific details, but you knew enough to understand there was a significant conflict of interest. I thought the personal issues were between Jake and his ex-wife. I didn't realize Brad was directly involved in their marital problems. Mr. Green, are you seriously telling this board that you believed it was appropriate to hire someone who was having an affair with one of your employees' spouses?" Thomas said nothing, his face the color of old parchment. Linda turned back to me. "Mr. Morrison, what outcome are you seeking from this investigation?" "I want justice," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Brad Patterson committed corporate espionage, fraud, and contract violations. He should be terminated, prosecuted, and forced to make full restitution for the damages he's caused. Thomas Green enabled this conspiracy through either incompetence or complicity. He should face appropriate consequences. And I want a public acknowledgement that my termination was unjustified and based on fraudulent circumstances. "And what about your ex-wife's role in this situation?" "Melissa Morrison facilitated corporate espionage by providing Brad with access to my personal information and helping him obtain my login credentials. She also benefited financially from his fraudulent use of company resources. I believe she should face criminal charges as well." Linda nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. The board will deliberate and provide you with our decision within 24 hours. I left the boardroom feeling like an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I'd done everything I could do. The rest was out of my hands, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching peace. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a glass of expensive scotch, watching the sunset and thinking about the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a successful corporate executive with a comfortable salary and a bright future. Now I was unemployed, betrayed, and plotting the systematic destruction of everyone who'd wronged me. But I didn't feel sorry for myself. I felt energized. For the first time in months, I had a sense of purpose and direction. My phone rang at 8:15. It was Linda Rake. "Mr. Morrison, the board has completed its emergency review. Mr. Patterson's contract has been terminated immediately. We are pursuing both civil and criminal action to recover consulting fees and damages. Mr. Green has been removed as CEO and will face potential legal action depending on the results of our investigation." "What about the criminal charges?" "I've already contacted the district attorney's office and the FBI. Based on the evidence you provided, I expect multiple felony charges will be filed against Mr. Patterson and possibly your ex-wife." "And the clients?" "We're conducting a comprehensive audit of all accounts Mr. Patterson had access to. Several major clients have already been notified of the security breach. We expect some contract cancellations, but we believe we can contain the damage if we act quickly." "What about my termination?" "The board has voted unanimously to offer you immediate reinstatement with a promotion to Vice President of Operations, a 50% salary increase, and a formal public apology for the circumstances of your departure. I was quiet for a moment, savoring the victory. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in coming back. I understand completely. In that case, we'd like to offer you a consulting contract to help us rebuild our security infrastructure and client management systems. The terms would be very generous. I'll consider it. Excellent. I'll have our legal team send over the details tomorrow. And Mr. Morrison, thank you for bringing this to our attention. You've saved this company from a catastrophic scandal. After I hung up, I poured myself another scotch and opened my laptop. I had 23 missed calls and 67 unread emails. Word was spreading quickly through Boston's tight-knit business community like wildfire through dry grass. One email was from a headhunter offering me a senior position at a Fortune 500 company. Another was from a startup offering me equity and a six-figure salary. A third was from a former colleague who wanted to partner with me on a new consulting venture. But the most interesting email was from a reporter at the Boston Globe. She'd heard rumors about a major corporate scandal and wanted to interview me. I deleted it without responding. I had no interest in becoming a public figure in this mess. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I opened it with a sense of grim satisfaction. You destroyed my life. I hope you're proud of yourself. You always were a vindictive bastard. It was from Melissa. She'd obviously heard about Brad's arrest. I typed back, I documented the truth. You destroyed your own life when you decided to betray me? She didn't respond. Over the next few days, the story unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Brad was arrested on charges of corporate espionage, fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal computer crime statutes. Melissa was arrested as an accessory and for her role in facilitating the theft of my login credentials. Thomas Green was forced to resign in disgrace and faced potential criminal charges for enabling the conspiracy. The Boston business press covered the story extensively. Tech executive arrested in corporate espionage scandal. CEO resigns after fraud investigation. Consulting firm faces federal charges in data theft case. Melissa lost her luxury apartment when Brad couldn't make bail or continue paying her expenses. She moved back in with her parents in suburban Worcester, a 42-year-old woman living in her childhood bedroom. The 3-carat diamond ring disappeared, probably sold to pay for legal fees. Brad's consulting business collapsed overnight like a house of cards. His other clients canceled their contracts, and his reputation in the industry was destroyed beyond repair. He faced up to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all charges. As for me, I had more job offers than I could handle. Word had gotten around about what happened at Meridian, and other companies wanted someone with my technical skills and demonstrated integrity. The fact that I'd uncovered a major corporate conspiracy made me something of a legend in Boston's business community. I eventually accepted a position as Chief Technology Officer at a mid-sized firm that specialized in financial services. They offered me a 30% salary increase, equity in the company, and complete autonomy over their technology infrastructure. 6 months later, I was having lunch at a restaurant in Back Bay when I saw a familiar figure huddled at a corner table. Brad Patterson, looking older and more haggard than I remembered. He was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit and picking at a salad while scrolling through his phone with the desperate intensity of a man watching his life slip away. Our eyes met for a moment across the restaurant. He looked away quickly and signaled for the check with shaking hands. I finished my meal slowly, savoring every bite and every moment of his humiliation. That evening, I got a call from my daughter Emma. She was 17 now, a senior in high school, and we talked every few days. Dad, I heard about what happened with your old job. Are you doing okay? I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm exactly where I need to be. Good. I was worried about you when you first got fired. But Mom says you landed on your feet like you always do. Your mom is right. Sometimes bad things happen for good reasons. What do you mean? Sometimes you have to lose something to realize how much better you can do. After we hung up, I sat in my home office looking at the awards and certificates on my wall. 8 years at Meridian, 18 million in revenue, countless nights and weekends spent building something I thought was meaningful. They'd thought I was disposable. A competent but unremarkable middle manager who could be easily replaced by someone with better presentation skills and more charisma. They'd thought I would just quietly disappear and look for another job like a good little victim. They'd underestimated me completely. I'd spent my entire career being the good guy, following the rules, trusting the system, believing that hard work and integrity would be rewarded. I'd been naive enough to think that loyalty was a two-way street and that doing the right thing would protect me from people who had no interest in doing the right thing themselves. But Brad and Melissa had taught